Imagine living in a rundown apartment, surrounded by noisy neighbors who never miss an opportunity to poke fun at you. You're just one of many struggling to make ends meet, and your life seems ordinary, nothing special. Now, picture the tables turning in an instant. That's exactly what happened to a man who was once the subject of ridicule in his own building. For years, he endured whispers behind his back, sarcastic remarks about his so-called low-class lifestyle, and the snickers that followed him every time he entered the building. Little did anyone know, this quiet man was not what he appeared. He wasn't just another tenant. He wasn't living paycheck to paycheck like everyone assumed. In fact, he was the one pulling the strings, the one who truly owned the place where they all lived. But here's the twist. He kept it all a secret, letting the mockery continue until the right moment came. What happened next will leave you speechless. As one by one, the truth started to unfold, the reactions from those who had mocked him were nothing short of shocking. They never saw it coming, and neither did the viewers who followed his every move. As the suspense builds and the tension grows, we're left to wonder. What will he do with this newfound power? Will he seek revenge, or is there something deeper at play? Stay tuned to find out how this quiet man, once overlooked and belittled, becomes the ultimate game changer. To understand what led to this moment, we need to go back a few years. The building was a forgotten relic of a once thriving neighborhood. With peeling paint, flickering lights in the hallway, and plumbing that seemed to break down more than it worked, it was the kind of place where no one ever expected anything to change. People came and went, struggling to pay rent, living in cramped spaces with no real future ahead. And amidst all this, there was him, James. James didn't seem like the type who'd own anything. He was quiet, unassuming, always in a worn-out sweater and carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He worked long hours as a janitor, cleaning up after the messes others left behind. The other tenants saw him as nothing more than part of the scenery. He'd nod at them in passing, offer a smile here and there, but never said much. They had their own lives to focus on, and he was just another worker who blended into the background. But little did they know, James wasn't as powerless as he appeared. While they griped about the crumbling building and complained about the constant maintenance issues, he'd been quietly watching the way people treated each other, how they acted when they thought no one was looking. And he saw it all, the greed, the arrogance, the assumptions that some people were just meant to serve others. And the landlord? Well, he didn't know the half of it. For years, James had been slowly buying up shares of the building, piece by piece, until he controlled more than anyone could guess. While everyone else focused on their day-to-day struggles, James had built a quiet empire right beneath their noses. But no one knew, and James intended to keep it that way. Until, of course, the right moment arrived. As time passed, the tension in the building grew. James wasn't the only one keeping secrets. The other tenants, too, had their own hidden struggles. Lisa in apartment 3B was always on edge, barely able to make her rent each month. She had a son to care for and barely enough time to sleep, let alone build any kind of future. Then there was Mark, in 2C, who had recently been fired from his job and was now scrambling to make ends meet. He'd often sit in the lobby, complaining about the state of the building, muttering about how the landlord was doing nothing to fix things. No one ever thought to ask James what he thought. He was just a janitor, after all, someone who lived below their radar. But when they spoke about the landlord's neglect, they couldn't know that James had been watching from the shadows. One evening, a loud argument broke out in the hallway, drawing the attention of nearly everyone in the building. Mark, furious about the latest issue that had flooded his apartment, stormed toward James' office. "Why don't you do something about this?" he yelled, his voice rising with frustration. James, standing quietly at the door, said nothing at first. His calm demeanor only added fuel to Mark's fire. "You're just a part of the problem. The whole building is falling apart, and nobody's doing anything about it." James knew Mark didn't know the half of it, how the building had been neglected by the true owners for years, how they'd barely scraped by, and how James had been silently buying his time. Inside the building, people like Lisa and Mark were fed up. They were desperate for change, unaware that the very person they thought was powerless was actually the one holding all the cards. The deeper the conflict ran, the more fragile the balance became. What would happen when the truth finally came to light? Would the tenants band together against the real villain, or would they turn on James for hiding his power? The tension was thick, and the air heavy with uncertainty. The days that followed Mark's outburst were tense. Word spread quickly around the building that something had to change. Whispers of rebellion started to grow louder, and tenants began to gather in small groups, sharing their frustrations and discussing what they could do. Lisa, who had spent so many sleepless nights worrying about the future, was especially vocal. She rallied the others, suggesting they take action and demand repairs from the landlord, even threatening to organize a protest outside the building. It felt like the boiling point was near, and every conversation seemed to add more fuel to the fire. Meanwhile, James watched it all unfold from the background, never revealing the full extent of his power. He knew that the situation was about to come to a head, but he wasn't sure how the other tenants would react when they learned the truth. Every night, he walked through the hallways, hearing the murmurs and complaints, feeling the weight of their anger. They were so close, yet so far from understanding what was really going on. He wondered if they would ever trust him if they knew the truth, or if they'd only see him as a threat to their own sense of control. Then, one evening, the building's maintenance crew arrived to fix the plumbing issue Mark had complained about, but something was off. The crew had no idea that the problem had been fixed long ago. James had quietly taken care of it himself, just as he had with so many other issues in the building. As the workers started in on the repairs, the tenants gathered in the lobby, eyes fixed on the scene. It was in this moment, as tension swirled, that James finally realized he couldn't wait any longer. It was time to make his move. What would happen when they discovered the truth? Would the tenants be shocked, outraged, or worse, feel betrayed? The weight of his decision pressed down on him, but there was no turning back now. Just as James was about to reveal himself, something unexpected happened. The building's landlord, the man James had been silently working against for years, showed up, unannounced, just as the tenants were on edge. No one had seen him in months, and he was always good at staying out of sight, letting his buildings fall into disrepair while still collecting rent checks. The landlord, Mr. Thompson, had been absent for so long that many tenants had assumed he was either dead or living somewhere far away, out of reach of their complaints. But here he was, stepping through the door with an air of smug confidence, as if nothing had changed. He didn't acknowledge the gathering crowd of tenants at first, his eyes scanning the room for James. A few seconds passed before their gazes met. James's heart raced, but he stood his ground. The landlord smirked, clearly unaware of the whispers that had been circulating about him behind his back. "I see you've all been busy," Thompson said, his voice cold and detached. "But I think it's time to remind you all who's really in charge around here." The air in the room grew thick with tension. Was he here to make a deal or shut everyone down? Lisa's voice broke through the silence. "You've done nothing but let this building rot, Thompson. You don't care about us." The others murmured in agreement, their voices rising in unity. But James remained silent, his mind racing. Something wasn't right. The landlord wasn't here to negotiate or make peace. His presence only escalated the conflict. In a split second, James realized the truth. Thompson knew exactly what was going on. Somehow, he had found out about James's secret ownership. And worse, he was prepared to fight back in ways no one could have predicted. The stakes had just been raised, and now the showdown between the quiet janitor and the ruthless landlord was inevitable. But what would happen next? Would the tenants back James, or would they side with the devil they knew? The tension in the room was palpable, the standoff between James and Thompson stretching out in an almost unbearable silence. Mr. Thompson's gaze never left James, a twisted smile tugging at the corners of his lips, as if he had already won. "You think you've outsmarted me, don't you?" he sneered. "But you've made one fatal mistake. You've underestimated me." Before James could respond, Lissa stepped forward, her voice shaking but determined. "We're done being your pawns. We know everything now. You've been hiding behind your power, letting the building fall apart while you profited off our misery. It's over." The other tenants rallied behind her, their eyes fixed on Thompson with a mix of anger and defiance. For a moment, it seemed like they were all ready to take back control. But just as the crowd's unity seemed to reach a boiling point, James raised a hand, signaling for silence. He turned to face the landlord, his expression unreadable. "You don't understand," James said quietly, his voice steady, almost cold. "You've been playing your game, thinking you held all the cards, but you never knew who I really was." James stepped aside, and in that moment, he reached for a stack of documents on his desk. He slowly placed them on the table for everyone to see. "These are the legal papers that prove my ownership. I've been buying up your shares for years, bit by bit, while you've been too busy enjoying your power trip. This building, it's mine." The crowd gasped, but the shock didn't last long. Thompson's face drained of color. You're lying," he stammered. But the papers didn't lie. James had outplayed him all along. Just when it seemed like James had won, the final twist hit. A figure appeared in the doorway, an unexpected ally. The lawyer from the building's management team stepped forward, holding up another set of papers. "You've been living in this building longer than you think," she said with a grin. "I'm your real landlord." Thompson's face twisted in disbelief as James looked on, both stunned and triumphant. The room fell silent as the lawyer stepped forward, revealing the final twist no one had expected. Thompson, the man who had ruled the building with an iron fist, suddenly realized that his control had slipped away long before he ever saw it coming. The lawyer, calm and composed, slid a few more papers across the table, each one marking the transfer of ownership. "James wasn't the only one who had been buying shares," she explained. "I've been purchasing them too, and when the time came, I stepped in to finalize everything." Thompson's face twisted with rage, his world crashing down around him. All the power he had clung to for so long was slipping through his fingers. His years of exploiting the tenants, of letting the building deteriorate while raking in the profits, had caught up with him. It was clear now, his reign was over. For a long moment, no one spoke, but then something remarkable happened. The tenants, once so divided and powerless, began to slowly come together. They exchanged glances, their anger giving way to relief and newfound hope. Lissa, who had led the charge against the landlord, gave James a grateful nod. The tension that had filled the building for so long began to dissolve as they realized they had all played a part in taking back control. As James stood there, a quiet smile tugging at his lips, he knew the battle had been won, but it wasn't over. This was only the beginning. The building would be restored, its true owners now in charge. The tenants would have a voice, and for once, their lives would not be defined by fear or neglect. James glanced around at the faces of those who had once mocked him, now looking at him with respect and admiration. The man they had all overlooked had turned out to be the one who changed everything. And as the last of the papers was signed, the future felt brighter for everyone. The building was no longer a place of despair. It had become a symbol of empowerment and unity.